All right, so it's Halloween this week, so I'm going to start off with my favorite Halloween joke. I went to the doctor this week, and the doctor kept trying to bite my neck. I do not recommend Dr. Acula. There you go. That's my favorite one. I know it's cheesy. There was a small town prosecuting attorney in a trial, and he called his first witness. He called a grandmotherly, elderly woman to the stand, and he came up to her and he said, "Now, Miss Jones, do you know me?" And she says, "Why, yes, I do know you, Mr. Williams. I've known you since you were a boy, and frankly, you've been a big disappointment to me. You lie, you cheat on your wife, you manipulate people, you talk about them behind their backs, you think you're a big shot, you don't even have the brains to realize you'll never amount to more than a 2-bit paper pusher, so yeah, I think I know you." And the lawyer didn't know what to do. And so he points over to the defense attorney. He says, "Do you know him?" And she says, "Oh, why, yes, I do. I've known Mr. Bradley since he was a youngster, too. He's lazy, bigoted, and he's got a drinking problem. He can't build a normal relationship with anyone. His law practice is one of the worst in the entire state. He's cheated on his wife with 3 different people. One of them's your wife. Yeah, I guess I know him, too." The defense attorney doesn't know what to do then. The judge says, "All right, let's hold on for a second. I want both of you up here at the bench right now." And they come up to the bench, and the judge comes up and he says, "If either one of you idiots ask her if she knows me, I'll put you both in the electric chair." All right, we're back in Genesis this morning. Genesis chapter 16. Genesis 16, and the last time we were in Genesis, a few weeks ago, we saw God make a covenant with Abram. He promised him that he'd have so many descendants that you couldn't number him. He says, "Look at the stars of the sky, and if you can count them, then that's how many descendants you're going to have. And if you can count all those, then come to the beach. And if you can count every grain of sand, that's how many descendants you are going to have." Abram, throughout Genesis that we've been reading, has shown a lot of faith. But this morning, we're going to see a serious lapse in judgment. We'll see the plan, the problem, and the promise. Let's read this passage together, Genesis 16, and we'll read the whole chapter. "Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children. She had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarah said to Abram, 'Behold now, the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her.' And Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. So after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abraham, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarai said to Abram, 'May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me.' But Abram said to Sarai, 'Behold, your servant is in your power to do to her as you please.' Then Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her. The angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, 'Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?' She said, 'I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai.' The angel of the Lord said to her, 'Return to your mistress and submit to her.' The angel of the Lord also said to her, 'I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude.' And the angel of the Lord said to her, 'Behold, you are pregnant and shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen.' So she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, 'You are a God of seeing,' for she said, 'Truly here I have seen him who looks after me.' Therefore the well was called Beer-lahai-roi, and it lies between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram called the name of his son whom Hagar bore Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram." I want you to see first the plan. Now, Sarai had not borne Abram any children. Abram's around 85, 86 years old at this point, and he's been together with Sarai for a long time, and God has promised them that they're going to have all these descendants, and yet here they are. He's about 85, 86, and she's 75 or 76 years old, and they still have not had a child. In those days, to not have a child was considered socially distressing. And I think Sarai maybe thinks that, well, maybe it's him and not me. Maybe it's his fault, not my fault. Now, we know that God's blessing has really nothing to do with that, but that's what people thought in those days, that that God was blessing you as a woman, and maybe not. So she thinks, well, if it's Abram and not me, then it's Abram that God's not blessing and not me that God's not blessing. So she has an idea, and she comes up and she says, Abram, why don't you go have sex with my female Egyptian servant so she can bear some children for us? All right, stop the tape right there. That's a weird request, isn't it? That's a very, very weird request. Men, let me go ahead and give you the correct answer to that question. No. No, I will not go to another woman to bear children. I will not go to your young, attractive female servant and do that. That's what Abram should have said. He should have said no. Sarah had this idea. It was a bad idea, but I think Abram, his thoughts got the better of himself. He says, sure, honey, if that's what you want, whatever you want, honey. And that's what he said. It was wrong for Sarah to suggest it. And second, it was wrong for Abram to accept it. Never should have done that. It says, and Abram listened to the voice of Sarai. And now it turns out that Abram was able to have a child, but he had it with Hagar, Sarai's servant. You see, they tried to take God's promises into their own hands. God said, I will let you have all the descendants you ever want. You're going to have a son, and then you're going to have so many kids. It's going to be unbelievable. You're not going to believe it. You can't even count them all. If you could count every piece of sand on the beach, then you'll know how many you're going to have. And God said, and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it. And it's going to be you and Sarah. And what does he say? They decide, well, we're going to take it into our own hands. Rather than waiting on God, rather than trusting in God, they decided to take it and to put it into their own hands. Don't try to take God's promises and put it in your own hands. It won't work. It won't work. People try to do that with salvation all the time. They'll say, you know what? I know if I can work hard enough and if I can push hard enough and I can just do enough good things, God's going to let me into heaven. But God made a promise and he said, all of those who come to faith in me will have eternal life. He doesn't say all those that work hard enough for me, all those that are able to do all these other things, that they're the ones who can get into heaven. He says, no, it's through faith. And that's God's promise to us. And what do they say? What did they do? They had the same promise from God, a promise of descendants, and they took it into their own hands. And that will cause nothing but trouble. Let God work it out in his own time. Well, what's the problem that comes from this plan? Hagar starts acting like she's better than Sarai because she had a kid and Sarai didn't. And she's like, yeah, you go on. I'm pregnant and you're not. Wasn't a real nice thing to do. And this made Sarai very mad, and rightfully so. But I think her anger was directed a little bit in the wrong way. What does she say? She goes up to Abram and says, what you've done to me, I hope it comes back on you. I hope it comes back on you so much harder than it ever was on me. I gave you my servant. Now what has she done? She has come and she's being mean to me. And it's all your fault. Now I think Abram was pretty reserved here, because probably what I would have said is, whose idea was this? Whose idea was it? It was Sarah's idea. And Abram says, okay, I'll go along with your idea. And then when it doesn't go the way that Sarah hoped it was, whose fault was it? It was Abram's, right? It was Abram's. Why would you do this to me, Abram? She says, may the Lord judge between you and me. I'm not so sure Sarai wants that. But that's what she says. May the Lord judge between you and me. And Abram was probably like, whoa, this was your idea. But maybe she was close to a cast iron pan or something like that. And he just said, honey, I'm not going to argue with you. That's your servant. You do whatever you want with her. You do whatever you want with her. You discipline her however you want to discipline. You do whatever. My hands are clean of this. So Sarai was mean to her, and Hagar runs away. Don't be surprised when you take God's work into your own hands and it doesn't work out the way you thought it was going to. We can have big plans. We could have big plans, and God could say, I've got plans for you, and you can really feel like that this is the plan that God has for your life, and then you can try to get out in front of God, and you can try to step out in front of God, and you can try to lead God instead of letting God lead you, and it's not going to work out. It's not going to work out the way that you think it's going to work out. One of the things that we really could stand to learn is patience. I'm as bad for it as anybody else. I bought something the other day that was $4. It was $4 plus $6 shipping. They could have, it's literally, they could have put it in an envelope with a 50-cent stamp, but that's fine. But then I was like, well, maybe that'll come tomorrow because it's just something real simple. It's a fuse. I needed a fuse for something in my car, and I was like, maybe that fuse will come so I can replace that fuse out. It's kind of a weird kind of fuse. You have to order it. It can't just come. And I was like, maybe it'll come. And then I looked at the tracking on it on Friday afternoon, and it says that it's made it from Atlanta, Georgia to Raleigh. And I said, well, if it's in Raleigh, then it'll come to Selma overnight, and then Selma will deliver it to me tomorrow. No, it decided to go from Raleigh to Greensboro because that's the right way to come, right? It actually went backwards. And I was, of course, why would they do that? How impatient am I? I can't wait till Monday to get it, right? It's got to be there. I pay, and probably a whole lot of y'all pay. Anybody else in here have Amazon Prime, or is it just me? All right, we got some other people with Amazon Prime. We pay Amazon $110 a year just so that they'll get our packages to us faster. And it's one of those things, and it's a good deal for us. It works out good if you're purchasing a lot from there just because you save on the shipping, but we don't have a whole lot of patience. We really don't have a whole lot of patience anymore, and especially we don't have patience when it comes to the things that God has in store for us. We want it now. We want it now. We're like that old Queen song, I want it all and I want it now. And that's what we say. And we shouldn't be that way. We should let God work these things out in His time. Look at the promise that's made. As Hagar flees, she's met by an angel of the Lord, and Hagar explains what's happened, and the angel tells her to go back and to submit to Sarai, but it doesn't end there. The angel also says, God has a promise for your son. What does he say? You're pregnant and shall bear a son. You'll call him Ishmael. And he'll be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over all his kinsmen. God made good on that promise. Ishmael had a lot of kids. Had a lot of kids, and his kids had a lot of kids, and his kids had a lot of kids, and his kids had a lot of kids. Whole lot of kids. Many Arab people, the Arab populations that we know today, guess who they're descended from? From Ishmael. So Ishmael ended up having a great nation of people. But it's interesting that it says that he'll be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell over against all his kinsmen. What do we have going on in the Middle East for the last 6,000 years? Right? It's basically the descendants of Isaac and the descendants of Ishmael, and they've been fighting each other forever, for as long as this goes. And so they took this into their own hands, and God did make a promise, and God said, I'm going to bless Abraham's child, even if it wasn't the child that I promised Abram. I'm still going to bless him, and he's going to be a great nation. And he was, and he is a great nation, one of the great nations of the world. When you think about all of his descendants and how they have spread as a large population. Ishmael himself became a powerful person. And there was not only that power for him, but that great animosity between his kinsmen, the Israelites and the Ishmaelites. Hagar recognizes that it's God who takes after her. It's God who looks after her. She had her eyes open because of God's mercy on her there in the wilderness. You see, taking God's promises into your own hands can have generational consequences. And it did. It did. We can't take God's promises into our own hands. We have to let God have his promises working through his hands. Don't take God's promise into your own hands. Let God do his thing. Be sensitive to his will. Be sensitive to the way that he leads. Don't try to do it the world's way. That's where Abram and Sarai messed up. They tried to do it the world's way. Because you know what was common in those days? And we'll see this later in Genesis as we go through. If a woman's like, okay, why don't you just have my servant as well as a wife and have more children? That way we can have more children. That was something the world did. Is that what God wanted to happen? Not at all. It's not what God wanted to happen. And so they should have just stayed strong. They should have trusted and believed in God. And we'll see as we continue on in this, in Genesis, over the next few weeks, that they still were having trouble believing God on this, especially Sarai. Especially Sarah. So we'll see that in the coming weeks. But we can't do that. Every promise that God has made to us through his word, he will come good on. And too often we think we've got to get ahead and we've got to make God's promises come true. We can't make his promises come true. His promises come true because they're his promises. And so we have to just trust in him. Let's bow our heads together.